Welcome, everyone. And thank you for having the courage to consider the idea that we have to face division in order to find unity, because that's the core idea behind this. And typically I begin with a poem, but on this occasion I want to begin with a little story. It was an Irish poet who said that a false sense of security is the only kind there is. And it turns out that at critical times in life, safety and security may only be found where the right risks are taken and where the right trouble is faced. And so as fears about the future of the world accumulate, I keep thinking of this old African teaching story about fear and safety and taking risks. And it goes like this. The tale begins on the ancient savannas of Africa, where life pours forth in the form of teeming, feeding herds. And as the hungry hordes eat their way across the plains, the lions wait in the tall grass nearby, anticipating their opportunity to prey upon the grazing animals. The lions send the oldest and weakest members of the pride away from the rest of the hunting pack. For having lost their strength and most of their teeth, the roar of the old lions is far greater than their ability to bite and do harm. And so they slip away and they settle in the grass directly across from where the strong and younger members of the pride wait for the grazing herds. So as the herds pass between the hunting pack and the old lions, the old ones begin to roar as mightily as they can. And at the sound of this terrifying roars, most of the herd panics, and blinded by fear and overwhelmed by a sense of imminent danger, they turn away from the roaring and run wildly and desperately into the opposite direction. And of course, as they flee from the source, they think of their fear, they run right into the strongest lions of the group, waiting for them in the tall grass. And so it's a teaching story, and apparently the old members of the human tribe would tell the young ones that when the world is in great trouble and when fear is increasing, run towards the roar. And so that's like a teaching. It's like something to keep in mind, because the world is roaring at us now from all kinds of directions and for all kinds of reasons. But if we run away from the roar, we could be running into the teeth of forgetting, into the teeth of not becoming. And so the idea is run towards the roar. And that's part of the idea of this session, is that we go towards the division in the world in order to understand not just what security and safety might look and feel like, but also what might be the kind of learning, what might be the gift behind the symptom, if we say the symptom is the roaring of the world. So the idea is we face our fears, we might find a way through. Matter of fact, the word fear comes from the old word fair, as in thoroughfare. And the old axiom was, what you fear is where you are going. So as the tensions in the outer world escalate, anxieties intensify in both the collective humanity, but also in individual levels. And feelings of insecurity and dread can become heightened as people feel less able to control things in the world, and as everyone gets more exposed to intensifications of uncertainty, similar to the herds on the savannah in a sense. There's this collective sense of panic and fear and helplessness. And so to be alive at this time, in a sense, is to be caught between the opposing poles of existence as things polarize and conflicts multiply. And as each side of a conflict becomes more single-minded, the polarization intensifies, and it leads to ever greater feelings of isolation, fear, and alienation. Currently, anyone who can be deemed other than whoever we are claiming to be, anyone who can be deemed other gets demonized. And here in the United States, where we are, you have this idea of mass deportation of immigrants. Of course, this is a country made by immigrants, but now there's supposed to be a mass deportation of immigrants who are being referred to as illegal aliens, as if it represents or demonstrates a psychic split in the common culture, but also a split that's inside of individual psyches. And so then one question could be, why in the world would things become split by that? And looking for that answer leads me to mythology. You could say that at critical times in life, whether it be the individual or society, the basic elements and the basic energies of existence polarize. In the current situation, as the cloth of civilization, as we call it, wears thin, and as the veil of reality lifts, what is revealed is the underlying tension of opposites that actually exists in the world from the beginning. And so what I want to do is go back to the beginning by virtue of a creation story. And in a sense, the assumption I'm working with is when the answers can't be found through reason and logic, when the answers can't even be found through psychology, the place to look for them is mythology. Mythology is about the great issues of existence that are universal and that keep recurring. And it turns out that one of the great issues is polarization, the tension of opposites. And it's in mythology that we can find meaningful reasons why that might occur and why that might occur repeatedly. And so, creation myths offer a different perspective on things like polarization than psychology or history or the study of the social sciences. Creation myths are not intended to simply explain the making of things or the shaping of the world. Rather, they are stories intended not to be believed, but to be learned from. Myths are like a series of lives that reveal deeper truths. And when we get really caught in life, myths can be the most valuable source of ideas, of energies, and of the truth in a funny way. Not the truths in a historical way or in the way of the matter of facts, but in the way of the things that matter most. And so there exists an entire category of creation stories in which a mistake occurs very close to the beginning of creation. And that mistake then gets repeated each time the world needs to renew itself. And you could say that when everything on earth becomes polarized, it becomes more important that we recall and learn from the stories that begin with the mistake at the origin of creation. And so one of these creation stories about the origins of mistakes, the origins of conflicts, and the origin of polarization happens to come from Persia, which was the name by which Iran, as we call it now, was known for centuries. And in ancient Persia, this deity called Zurvan was associated with creation and the origins, and specifically with the axis mundi at the center of the world. And Zurvan was typically depicted as a winged, lion-headed deity encircled by a serpent. And the understanding of that symbolism was that Zurvan was the embodiment of both time as limited time, marching time, but also Zurvan was symbolic of limitlessness, that is, say, timelessness. So Zervan was a god of the limits of time and a god of the expanse of timelessness. He was the opposites woven into one being, and he was the creator being in these ancient stories. And so the story of Zervan begins way back at the beginning, when it is said that Zervan existed all along and was not of any specific gender. And when the longing to create another kind of being arose in Zervan, that deity began to sacrifice in order to bring forth more life. And after a long period of self-sacrifice, Zervan began to doubt whether anything could come of all this effort. And the words he used are said to be, "Are these sacrifices of any use, or am I striving in vain to create more of life?" And there, right then, was the origin of doubt, the origin of uncertainty, you could say. And ever since then, doubt and uncertainty have been in the world. This is the kind of style that creation myths use. And it's the origin of doubt and certainty at the beginning of creation. This really applies to how we are living now. Because ever since then, each time someone wants to be creative, they will suffer from self-doubts. Anybody who is an artist or who, creates things will encounter their own sense of self-doubts. And this old story says that is the way of the world. So interestingly enough, this moment of doubt turned out to also be the moment of conception, as from that moment of uncertainty, there came forth two beings conceived in the womb of the Creator, who acted as both mother and father. And the two beings that were born out of longing and out of doubt were named Ormads, which means sweet-smelling and radiant, and Ahriman, which can mean darkness or full of lies. And as soon as those two were born, Ahriman aggressively turned against his bright brother Ormazd, and at that moment, opposition and conflict and the seeds of polarization entered the world in dynamic fashion. Just to underline, creation begins, and it begins with a division. It begins with a division that becomes an opposition. It begins with a division that becomes an opposition that leads to a kind of intense conflict. And so here's the value of a story that goes all the way back to the beginning to say that there has been something in the world all along, that when the veil of reality lifts, it gets revealed as a core basic opposition in life. And I'm not saying that this in any way kind of validates people that are being divisive. I'm not saying that it would discount anybody who's suffering from all of the divisions in the world, which by now includes almost all of us. But it's a way to possibly understand it or to consider it from a different point of view. So, in a sense, what's happened right as creation begins is the principle of disorder and darkness has attacked the principle of order in creation. And the story says that the chosen weapon of the principle of disorder turned out to be lies. Remember, Ahriman means darkness or full of lies. And so falseness and falsehoods and dishonesties and deceptions are part of this tension between truth and opposites, but it's been there all along. And it's kind of one of the values of mythology. It says these things aren't out of place, but these are things that we can learn about the place they have in the world. And you can't get that readily from science or readily from psychology for that matter. So according to the old story, ever since then, ever since this beginning conflict, there have been those who seek to rule by aggression and power, and those who seek to dominate by lies and falsehoods and disinformation. So one of the old ideas about myths is that they are ancient and immediate at the same time. And to me, this seems to be a myth that is being enacted right now in the world. And creation, according to this kind of story, is a radical process that includes an essential tension of the opposites that leads to inevitable conflicts which at critical time becomes the opportunity for more creation. Because what happens after those two twins who are so opposite are created is there's conflict, but there's eventually more creation also. So people that understand this kind of depth of knowledge about the tension of opposites realize we are in a creation moment again. We are in the times of creation again. That's what the myths would say about having to live inside the tension of opposites in the world right now. And the myths would also say this has happened before. It happened at the beginning. It's happened before. And that gives us a deeper kind of hope in terms of finding a way through it. So, in a sense, I'm saying, collective humanity is now in a condition of uncertainty and doubt and conflict and opposition that parallels old creation stories. Any issue that arises in the world right now becomes the source of greater polarization and conflict, as if to keep proving the point to us. We are in a condition that must be understood and cannot simply be dismissed, and it cannot simply be explained by history or political parties. It's deeper than that. And the political parties, such as they are caught in it. As a matter of fact, most parts of social life are caught in it. And we're not going to solve it through the next election, even though we should vote possibly for anybody looking like the brighter of the two twins. But it's not going to simply change it by voting. Something else is required. And that is found by going back to the story. So after Zervan has, sacrificed and suffered uncertainty and doubt, and then created the first two beings, it happens that Ormazd, the brilliant of the two brothers, the shining one, does not fight back when he is attacked by Ahriman with his darkness and his tendency for lies, but rather, and Ormazd does not turn the other cheek simply either. Rather, Ormazd turns inside, not denying the conflicts, but looking for an answer or a response or a solution or a remedy from inside. And it is that turning inside that causes a whole bunch of things to occur, which turn out to be the symbols and the representations of creation continuing. So first, there's the unified deity that's not either male or female or is both, and many other things. And then that one divides. That's how creation occurs, by a division. That's how we each got here. A single cell divided, more cells, it became us. This is being repeated all the time. But then, in order for creation not to get stuck in the process of polarization, it's as if Ormazd has to go inside and reconnect to the original energy of creation in order for creation to continue. So that's the basic outline of the story. And it's interesting that it comes from Persia, where so much of the tension of opposites can be focused in contemporary times. So what's being offered by the old myth is the idea that when we find ourselves in these conflicts that seem intractable and unresolvable, the issue is not to pick one side or the other in some simple response, although a lot of people will do that, but rather the solution is to turn inside and reconnect to the original instinct for creation, which, when they interpret this old story, they say is also the beginning of the search for wisdom. So one of the takeaways from the story is, in the midst of the conflict, the idea is to turn inside, seeking wisdom which can be found within, and connecting to the origins of life, which can serve continually as an ongoing source of creation. So that's kind of the sum of the story. And I'm saying that when the world is roaring the way it's roaring, we have to follow that kind of idea. The medicine we're looking for is inside. The wisdom that's missing in the world has to be found inside. You could say that the secret aim of the intention of the opposites is not to divide and destroy, but rather to awaken a deeper sense of creativity, wisdom, and imagination that can return the process of creation. So that the tension of the opposites, in its own essence, in its deepest sense, is not there to pull apart and destroy. It's there to remind us we have to look deeper for the source of unity. And for human beings, it's in our own selves, our deeper selves, or you could also say it's in our souls. I find it really meaningful that the doubt and uncertainty are there at the beginning. The amount of uncertainty in the world is immeasurable right now. The future of the world is in doubt. The future of planet Earth is in doubt. And so here's a story that says that condition of uncertainty and doubt is actually a position from which creation tries to continue. As if to say we are being called to a deeper sense of understanding, to a greater sense of imagination, and to a broader sense of spiritual qualities if we would change the conditions that the world are in right now. I mean, it's a wild idea. Mythology is full of wild ideas. And it's also not restricted by reason, by logic, by the happenstances of history, or by the fears of people. So the story is also saying it's not simply a matter of choosing between good and evil, or choosing good with the idea that you're going to defeat evil. That seems to play into the opposites. It says rather it's a matter of finding deeper, wiser understandings of what it means to be human and what it means to have a unique soul that is here on earth to live a life that will never be lived by anyone else, because part of the old myths is that each person born is unique. And each unique person is here with a story inside trying to unfold into the world, like Ormod's in the myth is seeking inside to bring something out so creation can continue. And in the old ways of mythology, we are each here as potential agents of ongoing creation. That's what I pull out of the idea of the old tension of opposites. Seen this way, polarization becomes a symptom trying to point towards a unity that's trying to awaken, and cannot simply awaken on a collective level, but can only awaken from the depths of the individual soul. So here's another idea from mythology, the sense that the individual soul, although just a speck in an immense universe, is secretly connected to the source of life, like in the myth, to the origins of creation, and therefore the changing, the transforming of life, the returning of life to the process of creation, the reconnecting of human culture to great nature. Nature is always in the process of creation. It never stops. It's creation on a momentary, daily, instant basis. And returning to that connection, or returning human culture to that kind of natural connection, is part of what has to happen when things get so far torn apart that we all experience the tension of opposites. So there's other ideas in here as well. That is to say, while the two poles of a polarity can seem to be irreconcilable opposites, they can also be seen to be secretly a unity, a hidden unity. In a true polarity, one side cannot exist without the other. Here in this world, day can't exist without night. Night can't exist without day. The left can't exist without the right. Up can't exist without down, and so on and so forth. Once the world divides and bifurcates, then the opposites exist in all kinds of ways, and one can't really exist without the other. And when two of them, any of those polarities become tense, become caught in a tension, the purpose of the tension is not destruction, it's a renewed creation. All opposites are secretly a hidden unity. So I'm not saying we don't have to pick a side when the issue, is about justice or about beauty or about meaning or about truth. I'm saying that the tension itself, the polarization itself, is not aiming for winners and losers. It's aiming at creation at a radical scale. So the problem isn't simply that things become opposed, but rather that we are often unable or sometimes unwilling to stay in the tension of opposites long enough for the third thing to appear. For the third thing is the motion of creation. So sometimes they would call that the hidden third. So you have two that are opposed, and the story really says when the two are opposed, go back to one, deep inside the connection to the origins and the source of life, and then from that one will come the third, and the third then dissolves the tension and moves creation forward. And the old idea is this applies to relationships, this applies to creative projects, and now this applies to the tension in the world. Choosing one side of a dilemma removes the tension, but it also then will renew at a deeper level. And so somehow we have to learn ways to stay in the tension. Now, I have to say, honestly, this is not something that's going to be understood widely in the common world. It's not that all of a sudden political parties and so on go, oh, wait, we get it. We were mixed up. We were supposed to just create a tension, not create a destruction. I think that's unlikely to happen. And that's why I present the idea that in old mythologies that I've been able to study, there's the idea that the human soul is secretly connected to the source of life. In ancient India, it was called the Atman. In tribal mythologies, it's also called the spirit or the great spirit. It goes by many names, but the idea is something in each person is connected to the source of life. That's why people can be creative. And when the world is falling apart, people are called to consciously awaken to that capacity to be connected to the source so that there can be a renewal that begins in the individual souls of people that begins to affect life itself. The old saying was, change the soul, change the world. It's a radical idea, but I think we're in need of radical ideas. So just to sum it up, genuine change and transformation are the secret aims of life, but also they are the secret aims of the tensions inside life. And as another poet once said, the only outcome of conflict that can satisfy the soul is a unity that brings that unity born of creation. So we're living in creation times. I know they seem like destruction times, but in mythology, destruction and creation are the two hands of the ongoing dynamic of existence. If we can accept that creation is not something that happened once upon a time, a long time ago, but actually creation is ongoing, we can begin to pull the threads that connect our own souls to the source of life, which becomes also the source of creation. And then if we can remind ourselves that being engaged in creation means entering the tension of opposites, but with the possibility that we could hold the tension until something that has not existed before can enter the world. And some of those things that need to enter the world through us. I mean those of us that are seriously looking for healing, seriously looking for medicine, seriously looking for a hidden unity to become conscious and be pronounced. So I mentioned medicine and healing. And so the word healing means to make whole. And so every time things get divided, it's the breaking apart of wholeness, of unity. And then medicines are those things that can help bring unity and back by healing, by bringing the parts together. And so goes back to another old idea, which everyone who's born is born with medicine. And the medicine we're each looking for is inside ourselves. That's an old Native American idea, that people are carrying medicine. And I know this isn't part of common education. And in the modern world, people think that they are empty inside. That's the most common conception. The theory of the self or the soul in the modern world is that it's blank, the blank soul, the tabula rasa theory. But the theory in all the ancient cultures and in most of the mythologies is that each soul born has an aim that it comes into life with. Each soul born has a complex of gifts and capacities that are intended to become conscious and be used, that each soul born is here to give something to the process of life. And so right as a time when we have mass cultures which tend to reduce the value of the individual, a person becomes part of a voting group, part of a purchasing group, part of an AI group, for God's sake. But originally, each person is imagined as a unique being coming into the world, gifted and aimed. And when the world itself seems about to fall apart, the place that we have to turn to is inside in order to find that deep connection to meaning in ourselves, to the centrality of the soul, but also to the soul's capacity to create in the midst of tension and uncertainty. An old saying was that the effect of the elemental oppositions is to stimulate life itself. So I'm trying to draw on these deep old mythological, philosophical ideas in order to say that we have to run towards the roar of things and trust that we are not at the end of the world. We are simply at the end of the world as we knew it. And the end, mythologically, always leads to the beginning. The word end really means loose end. It means remnant, that thing that's left. And from the remnants, the world renews itself. And I'm using that old myth to suggest that this has been part of the world all along. And that when we find ourselves, and that creation myths are actually recreation myths, that all the myths of creation are really talking about how we envision recreation. And so, are we at the end of the world? Yes. But are we at the beginning of the next creation of the world? Yes. And that's the tension. And you could say that we are here, and the more conscious we become, the more we become witnesses to the collapse, but potential agents to help with the recreation. And it's not to become inflated. It's just to say that becoming ourselves more genuinely, we automatically contribute to the increase of life. That's another old idea. I mean, Freud, who in a way brought psychology back to the modern world, when he got older, he was afraid that there was he called it the primal horde, because he kept dreaming about that. And it was inside him and it might devour him. And his student, Carl Jung, who was studying mythology of all things, came to the conclusion, no, in the depth of the human soul, there's not a primal horde. It's not a regressive, repressive return to something that is not alive or is dangerous, but rather in the depth of the human soul, each soul born, there is this deep self that is connected to the source of life and connected to the endless potentials for renewing life. And under pressure, that's what we turn inside to find. And then again, just as the story is saying, that will come with intense uncertainty and doubt. Anyone who creates will begin to doubt themselves just the way the creator in the story was in doubt at the beginning. I find these things so kind of encouraging, so it's reinforcing that, in other words, right now it feels like it shouldn't be these opposites. And yet, from a deeper point of view, it becomes these opposites when the world needs to renew itself. And then along with that comes this old idea that although we can feel isolated and alone, from a mythological view, and even from a deep psychological viewpoint, we are not simply alone. Another idea that Carl Jung brought into common language was the idea of the archetypes. Arche means ancient, and type means forms. The ancient forms, the underlying archetypes, the archetype of mother and father and child. But at this critical time in life, the two archetypes that are most valuable, I would say, is the archetype of creation, which I've been talking about through that myth of Zervan, and the archetype of the deep self, which is in that story. And so if we accept that we're in this creation time, which feels also like a destruction time, and I guess I should throw in the idea, in case you haven't heard it, that apocalypse doesn't mean fiery end of the world. The word apocalypse means collapse, renewal. It means not just collapse and then renewal, but it actually means collapse and renewal happening intermittently and at the same time, as seemed to be reflected in the creation myth about Zervan. So we're in the collapse time, which means we're also at the edge of the renewal time. We're in the tension time, but the point of the tension is to find a unity. And when the outside world can't provide unity, we have to turn to the inside world to find it. And when we turn inside, it's very helpful to know that in the depth of each of our souls is this ancient and immediate connection to the source of creation, to the source of life that is trying to come through us and live into the world in a way that is unique. I keep coming back to the uniqueness of the soul, because in these mass cultures with mass communication and mass confusion, what gets overlooked is the essential, indelible value of the individual human soul. Because history is not made by forces in the outside world simply. History is made in the depths of the human soul. And we happen to have, who knows why, be born and to live in a time where everything gets polarized, where everything gets conflicted. But if we can apply these ancient ideas, it is also the time when everything tries to get renewed, and we are being called to be part of that. And so I want to add one other thing about this, which is from a completely different culture, but because of how it shows or displays something about this uniqueness of the soul and its capacity to understand, to have wisdom, and to be part of the process of creation in a way that's different, in a sense, from the old Persian view, but it's connected. And in this case, it's from the Naskapi First Nation people who live in the forests of the Labrador Peninsula in eastern Canada. And they traditionally live in small, mostly isolated groups. They have few tribal customs and a minimal amount of collective religious ideas and beliefs. And they hunt in small groups or as separate individuals. And yet, even though they can remain isolated in the bush for long periods of time, they say that they are never alone. And so they have this sense of having a companion, and this sense extends to the idea that each individual develops a bond with an inner guide and an inner companion that is called the Mistapeo. And what it seems to mean, Mistapeo seems to mean the great person. And the idea is that the great person dwells in the soul of each individual. And this inner figure that accompanies them on their solo journeys and is with them during these long periods when they are isolated and seemingly alone, that this inner figure serves as an orienting center and as a companion and a guide for each individual. And their understanding, as is the case in many ancient cultures, is that this great person within, which people often call the deep self or the deep soul, is somehow uniquely present in each person. So it's the great self connected to the source of life, but when it's experienced in life, it's experienced in a unique and individual way. And the Naskapi say that the more they trust this inner companion, the more wisdom they find and the more truth becomes revealed to them. And although it's connected to the universal source of life, the experience of it is very personal. And they imagine that this deeper part of their being is specifically receptive to callings and dreams. And they're called to understand certain things or to live in certain ways, to develop certain arts and certain skills. And they're also called to respond to big dreams or great dreams. So they connect dreaming to the source of life, and they connect skills and gifts to the source of life. And they say this inner guide, this great person, is in your heart and speaks to you from there, a place deep within your heart, which people used to call the heart within the heart. And they say that lies and dishonesty, this starts to sound like the myth of Zervan, that lies and dishonesty drive the great person away from someone's heart, whereas generosity and love attract this spirit, the spiritual presence to those who are being generous and loving. And so this idea of a great person deep within us, otherwise called the deep self, otherwise called the deep soul, has great relevance at this time when the sense of unity cannot be found in the outer world, and I would suggest is not going to be found soon. The outside world is not going to settle soon. What's happening is a very big thing, a trans-historical thing. And near as I can tell from myths and even from depth psychology, the unity we need, the unity we essentially must find in order for life on earth to continue, has to first be found inside our own souls, in a connection to what the Naskapi call to the great person dwelling within. So in a sense, you could say that we are here now being called to awaken to this sense of a deeper self, to a wiser soul, to a spiritual essence that is connected to the source of life and therefore connected to the future of life on earth. And even though that runs counter to the modern feeling of being just a speck in an endless universe, it becomes the essential thread through which we can unfold from ourselves the meaningful things that we brought to life, that are intended to be given, and that when they are given automatically add to creation and increase the presence and the meaning and the beauty of life. So there was an unwritten law that says an experience of this deep sense of self is so essential to the life of a human being that it will happen to a person at least once. And the question is, do we respond when it happens? Can we awaken to what it's trying to tell us? And for most modern people, this has happened. Like during our youth, it happens for those of us that are older. But since the world isn't aware of it, and since the modern cultures are based on an exaggeration of reason and things like that, there's no support for it. There's no one to turn to and say, I think I just had an experience of Mr. Peo, or the deep self, or the Atman, or the Great Spirit. And so it goes unmarked and it gets forgotten. And yet, these things that are connected to the eternal are timeless, not time-bound, and they can be tapped back into. And so the old idea is everyone has the experience, and it can always be tapped back into because it lives in a part of the self and a part of the soul that is timeless, not time-bound. So when this kind of inner experience happens, and it's intended to happen to everybody, it used to be called the second birth, that we're first born into the world of oppositions, into the world of day and night, into the world of up and down, into the world of what many people now call the winners and the losers. But another birth is part of the expectation of the human soul, And the second birth is the awakening of a connection to the essence of life, to the heart of nature, to the pulse of the cosmos, and to this inner spirit potential companion and guide that used to be called the daimon or the genius or the essence of one's soul. And so here we are in the conflicted world, in the divided world, in the world of uncertainty and great doubt, in the world that feels like it's coming to an end, and yet we are secretly being called to acknowledge that, to witness that, but to also be part of a reimagination, of a reinvention, of a recreation that is trying to happen now, just as it has happened many times before, and just according to the myths, as it happened at the very beginning. So I see that there are questions, and I'll try to answer some. What really is the mistake? And why is the mistake necessary at the origin? Good question. So I said there's this whole category of myths where the mistake happens at the beginning. And in the story of Zervan, the critical thing is that the mistake is not made by the creature as it is like in the Bible. You know, the created beings make the mistake, and the deity of creation gets offended and throws them out of the garden, and then the deity exits and hangs out somewhere else, and the world becomes a place of sin. But no, in most of the stories, what happens is that the mistake is made by the divine. And so if we want to be smart and philosophical, then we could say, well, maybe the mistake is not actually a mistake. So I kind of was hinting at the Garden of Eden in the Bible story. So if we go to the Bible story in the Garden of Eden, the idea is that Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden, which was the place of unity and beauty, where the lions lay down with the lambs and the rivers are full of honey and all that kind of thing, because they wanted knowledge, because the serpent gave them, told them to eat the apple, and the apple was from the tree of the division of good and evil, and so they learned about knowledge, and they wanted the knowledge that the divine had. And in that story, the divine, the God, was jealous or envious or touchy. And so when they aspired to that kind of knowledge, they got kicked out. It's a certain kind of story. But if you say, why would the God of creation put a tree that has on it the apples that could give the knowledge to the created beings that goes beyond their basic understanding? Why would the God of creation do that? That seems like either like a mistake or like a plan. And so I think of the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden as a starter tree. And it was to start the drama of going looking for wisdom and going looking for unity. And behind the tree of division, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the center of the garden was the tree of life. And so the tree of life is the place of union, but everything has to move away from that in order to go find it again. So I don't know, I'm just bringing out different stories. But I think sometimes what they're doing is playing with the idea what looks like a mistake is actually a necessary thing. Someone says this: unconditional love is big enough to hold the opposites. How do I feel love for people who are bombing children? Yeah, okay, thank you. That's part of the problem. This gets at the pain. This gets at the problem with the tension of the opposites. I'm with you. It's hard to feel love for people who are bombing those who are helpless, those who are defenseless, and those who are innocent children. And I don't know that we're supposed to feel love for them at that moment. I don't feel that. I get the opposite. And so I don't think the story is saying don't have real feelings. And I really don't think the story is saying pretend that it's all equal to you. I think it's something different. First of all, I think unconditional love is a rare thing for a human being. And so I think, like the stories, maybe that's why I want to tell the story. That story of creation in Persia says that creation delivers the opposites, and the opposites go to battle And then from that destructive energy, from those lies and distortions and disorientations, we have to find our own connection to the source of unity, the source of creation, and the source of love. And I think that's a little different from saying I have to love those that are bombing. I don't know. I don't know. I don't love them for bombing. And so I think it's actually different than that. I don't think the love has to completely include those who are acting out the worst instincts of humanity. I think it does mean that we can't simply say, well, we'll bomb you and that'll fix it. I think it does say that we can't say because you've done something so bad, I can have a depth of hatred in myself that is justified. I think it says I have to take this painful knowledge that I have that destruction is happening to innocent people and even children and babies right now. And I have to, in the midst of that pain, without rejecting it, like Ormad's in the story, I have to find within myself a depth of humanity, a depth of soul, and a quality of self that knows that I'm not here to add to that kind of destruction, that I'm here to in some unique way, add to a creation that is trying to happen in the midst of the destruction. I hope that helps. Can you speak to the origin of separation consciousness? I'm not sure what that means. I really don't know. Is a specific term it is? I'm not familiar with it. I'm going to pass on that. You can come back and clarify the question maybe. Sometimes it can be challenging to arrive at language that offers clarity that can dissolve tensions. What offers promise in addition to language? Good question. Yes, especially the language of reason. We are educated that everything should be worked out through reason, that the opposition should be solved through things like compromise. Mythology is saying it's solved through things like creation, and the language of creation, the language of the soul, is symbolic. So what you could say, what we need is living symbols. And the old idea was in the tension of things. Think about the musician, think about the painter, think about the poet, think about anybody who's creating things. They'll go through the doubt and uncertainty, or they'll get started and then they'll feel uncertain, pick your style. And then something will come. And it comes from an unseen place. I know people say, it's my art, it's my painting, it's my song. But anybody who does creative works knows it's coming from somewhere else and it's coming through us. And it comes through by virtue of imagination. And the language of imagination is symbol. And so what's going on now is the symbols that we had that represented the unity of the world are no longer really functioning. And we need to allow new or old symbols that are made new to come through us, and then we'll find the symbolic language. I hope that's helpful, but that's a good question. It's poetry is the natural language of the human soul. Mythology is the essential primordial thinking of the human soul. We've lost things that are primordial from the beginning and that are essential to us. And I'm pretty serious when I'm talking about the meaning and the purpose and the value of mythology, because mythology is this old language in which we can find symbolic ways to refer to destruction, to opposition, even to evil. And it's our natural language, but it's the lost language, and we have to find it again. And I just want to make clear this is not simple. And that's why I was saying at the beginning, I really thank everybody and respect everybody to come to an event that's about division, because we don't have a shared language about how to look at it, how to be in it, and how to change it. Hi, Michael. Is this just happening? Do we need to do anything or just allow it to happen? Well, it is just happening. It's a done deal. It is the happenstance that we all live in. Do we need to do anything or just allow it? No, we need to do something. And I'm saying the thing we need to do is not based on suddenly everybody works out an agreement and here's the idea that no one had, or here's the type of leadership no one had. I'm saying what we need to do is become the best version of ourselves we can become, because then we align with the deep sense of self or the deep sense of soul. Then we align with this great person that the Naskapi people are talking about, and then we are more likely to be part of the contributing of love and generosity and healing, but also to be the manifestation of gifts that are naturally ours to give. And then it isn't a matter of fitting into some form that someone comes up with. I'm following this old tradition that says we are here to transform into who we already are at the core of our life. And when we do that, we are automatically bringing something to life that wouldn't otherwise exist. And when we do that, we not only feel an inner unity and a wholeness and a healing of our own selves, that we bring elements of wholeness and healing to the world. And when enough people do that, then the world changes. Try to go and stop someone who's bombing. If they're committed to do it because of historical things, because of terrible things that have happened on all sides of all kinds of disasters. People have been inhumane to other people for as long as history has been. But you can't simply stop someone until they're ready, until the pain has become enough, until something calls to them and they respond. So that's not our job, really, to simply help them or fix them. That's that savior complex, and it doesn't work out very well. Our job is to save our own lives. We are being called to save our lives from being pointless or meaningless or not being fulfilled. And I'm simply saying, based on mythology, based on old ideas, that is our core responsibility. And when we do that, then we find the language. For some people, the language is in music. For others, it's in art. For others, it's in being a death doula. There is a language our soul already knows, and that soul language is a gift to the world when we can find it, when we can live it, when we can find ways to speak it and give it. Then we are changing the world in a way that is essential and meaningful, but also genuine and something that doesn't need the agreement or the approval of any outside force, because it is in agreement with the inner sense of self, or the great person within, or the Atman, or the great spirit, or the daimon, or the genius. I have a terminal illness and have this parallel experience of my personal world coming to an end, along with the world as I and we know it. I'm very occupied with growing my soul to help myself, and I guess the world. I see glimmers in my personal life. I wonder what you see as glimmers of creation in our world. I don't think it's AI or crypto. Do you? Those seem like trickster elements. Well, two things. One is, I'm sorry for the terminal illness and what that must mean to know that. I mean, we all have a terminal illness. It's called life. But some of us have knowledge that the terminal part is closer. And that's a hard thing to live with. And so I just want to say that I respect you for bringing that out. And somehow I feel how that must be painful. And I love the fact that in the midst of that, you're growing your soul, and that you see glimmers. And I love the word glimmers. It's like swimmers. It's like glints. It's like shiny things, not that are there to distract, but are there to call us and connect us to hidden lights and hidden possibilities. And so really, that's wonderful that you do that. And of course, they're different from AI and crypto. These things define themselves. AI means artificial intelligence. It's artificial by its own naming or its own denotation. We don't need more artificial things. Oh, we will get them, but we don't need them. I like authentic intelligence. That has value for me. And of course, crypto sounds like a scam or a deal by its very title. And so those are the things that come out. It's like Ahriman in the myth. Those are the things that are the tricks and are the lies and are the distractions. And we are living through that. It's going to continue. AI is going to go as far as they can take it. And I'm trying to say, I'm not saying it's evil and I'm not saying we should destroy it. I'm saying we are not really called to do that. And that we are more called to find the authentic intelligence of our own souls. And doing that has turned out to be an unusual thing. It has turned out to be the thing that mass cultures cannot conceive. AI is a product of mass culture. So is the internet. What we need and what we are naturally inclined to be part of is an individual, unique awakening that gives us access to our own gifts and our own inner language and our own inborn sense of meaning and purpose. And when we do that, we are adding beauty to the world, meaning to the world, truth to the world, and authenticity to the world. And right now, that's an essential thing. And so, for what it's worth, I'm agreeing with our friend who has a terminal illness, but whose imagination and soul remains quite awake and alert and seemingly connected to the callings of creation. So I'll stop there and go on. And so the beginning of that first part was about mythology and the depth of the soul. And so that's a big subject. I mean, we could go on with that endlessly, truly. But where I want to turn to is stepping off from what I was just talking about. And the idea that the uniqueness of the soul and how that appears in myth and what that can tell us about what we're, again, another version of what we're supposed to do in these end times that are really creation times as well. So start with a quote. No one can build the bridge on which you and only you must cross the river of life. That's Nietzsche. And the suggestion is that we're here to cross the river of life. And what does that mean? Well, one side of the river is time-bound, and the other side of the river is timeless. One side of the river is the common daily world where we're going to see the explosion of AI, as well as the explosion of more bombs and so on, and other things, roses and beautiful other growing things, and also beautiful animals, and all that is in that side, in a sense. And then the other side is the other world, the world of imagination, the world of ongoing creation, the world of spiritual elements. And you could say, in a sense, the world of nature seen in its essence. And so he's saying, I'll repeat it, no one can build the bridge on which you, and only you, must cross the river of life. We not only have to make the crossing, we have to build a bridge, in a sense. And it's the bridge of imagination. And it becomes the bridge of creativity. Another saying, this is from Seamus Heaney, the Irish poet. He was counseling young poets, and he said this, or something close to this. The true and durable path involves you being true to your own solitude and you being true to your own secret knowledge. Poets are supposed to be telling the truth. There's truth in that. And the truth of that sounds like the Naskapi native imagination of the great person within. The true and durable path involves being true to your own solitude, true to your own secret knowledge. This is the old story. The secrets we're looking for are inside. The knowledge we're seeking is also inside. We have to go out into the world to find it, but what we're looking for is already in us. And then maybe a third one, and this is E.E. Cummings, American poet, who did this interesting thing of writing without capital letters. He's like the opposite of Donald Trump. People here get very tired of these missives from Donald Trump, but they're often in all caps. E. Cummins wrote it all without caps. And he wrote this: to be nobody but yourself in a world that is doing its best night and day to make you into everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting. We are here, and fighting here doesn't mean doing harm. We're in the tension of between being everybody else and being our unique self. It's a fight worth having. It's also the fight in which we transform ourselves and become something surprising to ourselves and also something that's a gift to the world. For when we find this connection to deep self, we find our best way to contribute to the world. All right. So how do we learn about this, or how do we understand this? I'm saying from mythology, because that's where I find the greatest ideas. So this is a pre-Roman origin tale from what we now call Italy. And this one involves this involves a goddess. And the name of the goddess is Fortuna. And she's the goddess of fertility and fortune and luck. And she would appear holding a cornucopia or a horn of plenty, representing the abundance of the feminine, the abundance of fertility, the abundance of nature and life itself. But she would also be holding a wheel of fortune because she was the original, or one of the original goddesses of fate. And fate means anything that limits us. And everybody used to understand that everyone is born into a kind of fate. Everyone is dealt their own hand of fate. And in this old story, when a soul was about to be born, Fortuna would appear with a great earthen jar that contained small pieces of wood that were drawn from the tree of life at the center of creation. So notice it's the same tree of life that Zirvan in ancient Persia represented a connection to. Tree of life is one of the old living symbols. It appears in the Bible, but it appears in myths all over, because it's like the axis in the middle of the world that's a living sense, like a tree that keeps growing and expanding, both growing down and branching out. And so Fortuna was connected to that tree at the center, and her big urn, her earthen urn, had in it chips from the roots of the tree of life. And at the crowning moment of birth of each child born, the jar would be shaken, and the first chip that fell out would become the lot in life for that soul. It was called the lot. And then it really interesting to me in the old description was that this lot, so like this is our lot from the original lottery, this lot was blank on one side, and then on the underside, there was what was called a divine word was inscribed. So each person is given their lot in life, and part of it is a blank side, but the underside, as with the deep self or the deep soul, the underside has a divine word. So each human birth delivers a living divine word into the world. I mean, I love this stuff. This is the way we can see the value of our own self despite our weaknesses, despite our neuroses, despite our uncertainties. And this is the way we see the beauty of other people. This is the way most parents see the beauty of their own children until the world starts to change all that. But it also, this old idea says one side of it is blank, and that's kind of true. That's called tabula rasa, the blank side of the soul. And when we come into the world, we're dependent on those around us. Human beings are one of the most dependent animals or mammals. And so our parents and our family and our community and our schools and our nations all write stuff on the blank side. And in the modern world, a lot of people think that which is written on the blank side of the soul is who they are. People actually think that's who they are. But On the underside, in the inside, in the downside, in the soul side, each person has a divine word. And it's not like simply a word like faith or truth or beauty. It's like an inscription on the soul. It's a word that becomes a story. It's a word that is, in its essence, a story trying to unfold from within the person, and it comes from a divine source, and it's intended to deliver a divine something to the world. I'm just going to another myth that says this thing that I'm so intrigued with. Um, so there are two sides of our life. And one side has a fateful quality that involves all those things that happened when we were early in life and we were dependable and we couldn't defend ourselves and we were permeable. And those things are real and we can experience those things over and over. But the idea of being born again is connected to the revelation of the underside of the lot in life, of being born again into a knowledge of who we are in the depths of ourselves. Everybody can figure out to some degree who they are in terms of their personal history. And that for every person born so far will involve being wounded and being abandoned and having all these kind of experiences that could be called negative, but everybody has them. So I think that should be called something other than that. And ancient people called them fate, the limits of a person, the limits of our experience, the wounded sides of ourselves. And if that was the whole story, then this would be, really a misadventure. But it isn't the whole story, because on the underside is the divine part of each person's soul that is here to be awakened to become more conscious. And when that happens, then the beginning of the healing of all the fateful elements, the healing of the original attachment disorder or the abandonment process, or the healing of the wounds that we got early in life. And by the way, everyone got them. And the people who say they were not wounded early are the most wounded people. But the healing of them comes from the awakening of the underside or the inside or the deeper part of us, which is the aspect of the soul that carries this sense of the divine, which has the capacity to bring healing to the parts that are wounded. But healing also means wholeness, and so it has the capacity to bring all the wholeness of us, the whole package, the things that we are originally unaware of, but that we can become conscious of, and those are the things that we are really intended to give to the world. So on the underside of each person is this touch of the divine. And when the world outside is falling apart, it's this deeper inside, underside that is really needed in order to survive. It gets to the point where the issue isn't simple surviving, it's the issue of the surviving of the part of us that is transcendent, that is capable of healing and capable of bringing meaning and beauty and truth to a world that has lost those precise things. It may be our shared fate to live at a time of worldwide crises and radical changes that are happening so fast that they can't be integrated. But it is also our fate to have something of a divine nature. That's what it would be called in mythology. Something of the touch of the divine, something of the touch of the creator and the creative. That is part of our fate as well. And when times are like this, it's that underside, that inside, that second birth quality, that rebirth capacity that is being called on. And so the old idea was, this was well known in cultures throughout the world, that there are two adventures for the human soul. And they're like the two parts of the lot in life. And the first adventure is to wake up, enter the world, and get a life, as they say nowadays. It's a genuine adventure to manage to grow through whatever's going on in our family of conception, to find some way of establishing ourselves in the common world, to find a career, to to succeed or to fail from the point of view of the soul, succeeding and failing are both interesting and both should happen. But to find a way into the world, and from a psychological level, to develop an ego, a sense of self that we can present to the world, which, by the way, is not exactly the part that we're supposed to bring, but everybody has an ego or a little self that forms in the confusion of childhood in order to find something that we can present to the world that allows us to exist, that allows us to get some kind of nourishment, to get some kind of protection, and to get some kind of affection. And that's the first adventure, and everyone has to undergo it. But that's not the entire story. And the next part, called the second adventure, is the adventure that the soul would have us go on. So the first adventure, often we're following a map made by others. My mother was certain that I needed to be, first of all, a priest. And when I didn't want to be part, I figured out pretty quickly I didn't want to be part of the Catholic Church because they kept talking about original sin. And I was like, I haven't even done anything yet. How can I be guilty of some originals? Anyway, there were things about it that disturbed me. And when I clearly wasn't going to go for that profession or that path or that career in life, then it became, well, you should be a doctor. And truth is, I'm interested in healing, but I didn't want to go into the medical profession. So then she said, well, then you have to be a lawyer. I mean, there were a lot of maps that were being suggested and sometimes being insisted upon. But eventually we have to go off the maps that we were given. We have to realize that the maps that most of us have been given, and that includes in the modern world, the maps that says you're just a small speck in a great universe. We have to go off those maps and to find the path that our soul would call us to. I'm calling it the second adventure of life. And it's interesting that it's a well-known thing, and many of the theorists, including, say, Carl Jung, who I respect a lot, but in his psychology, he suggested, as others have suggested, that the second adventure is part of the second half of life, as if the first half is lived with engagement of the world on its terms, and the second half you get then a reprieve, and you can live closer to the soul and its terms. I want to suggest this. When the world is so full of conflict and so full of disorientation and so full of isolation and so unclear about the future, that it may be that the second adventure of life has to be engaged sooner and certainly be engaged more often. I'm imagining that young people right now might need more knowledge about the second adventure in order to survive the first adventure. That young people might need more exposure to the knowledge of their own soul and what it means to have a soul and be a unique being, that they might need that earlier than some theorists would think because of the confusion and disruption and upheaval in the world around them. And I'm certainly suggesting for the rest of us that the second adventure is not only the place where we might find a sense of inner centrality and inner peace or inner union, but also the place in which we can find the best ways that we can awaken to our own inner qualities or work into the resonance of the divine word in ourselves, and then figure out how we can bring that inner resonance, that inner style of creativity to a world that desperately needs it. So the first adventure is necessary for basic survival. It's necessary for socialization. And it's actually necessary for the continuance of the species. But we are not here simply for that. We are here to follow the soul. We are here to crack the shell of the ego and reveal our inner resources and the callings and destinies of our unique souls. So this second adventure arises from the soul's deepest imagination and from the life purpose that is already embedded in each of our hearts. The word purpose is a beautiful word. It means to have aim. It means to have direction. But I think there's a misconception. People think they can go out and find a purpose when actually you go in to find a purpose. The purpose of the individual life is already woven in. They used to call it into the heart, that our purpose is in our heart. And so there needs to be an awakening and an opening of the heart that reveals its purpose, as if the heart and soul of us came in with a purpose, which is really what the story of Fortuna and the lot in life is suggesting. So this soul adventure is not simply a matter of rebelling against social norms and received ideas. And it's not about being egocentric or self-involved. It's more like an initiatory path through which we become more truly conscious and more capable of both psychological growth and spiritual awareness, with an aim towards fulfilling an inscription that is in our soul from before we are born. And so to me, that's the simplest version of the most profound story for humanity that's been around since the origins, but keeps trying to make a comeback. The second soul involves what's called the second adventure involves the ambit of the soul. The word ambition comes from an old word, a verb, ambit, which means to walk the circle of things. It comes from these kingdoms and realms used to be not very big. There was lots of them, and they would be small. And whoever was the queen or the king or whoever, each year they would have to walk the ambit of their realm in order to maintain a connection to the realm, in order to understand and maintain a connection to the land and to the place that they were trying to rule or govern. And so ambition means to become aware of the entire scope or ambit of our own soul. To be really ambitious is not to rise to the top. That may be the case for some people. That might be the destiny for some people. For most people, real ambition means awakening to who we are in our own essence. And so I'm suggesting that's a different kind of ambition, that not the ambition of the first adventure of life, the ambition of the soul to become aware of the circular completeness of the inner unity, and the soul is always seen as a circle, as a wholeness. And that's the real ambition in life. And you could say then the greatest human tragedy is a life disconnected from its own nature. And that is the most common tragedy now. Who was that? Someone that said the origin of despair is living without knowing your own essence. And that's most typical now. And so when that's the typical life, and tension and polarization and dangers enter, people are stuck. And that's what's happening in general. And then people fall under spells, they attach themselves to belief systems that are not soulful. They attach themselves to theories or, that don't make that much sense, out of fear of being simply isolated or stuck or overwhelmed. And that's understandable. But for anybody paying attention, the point is, when the outside world is not working, to find a deeper grounding in the inside world and trust that we actually are all carrying something inside that is unique, that is essential, and that is not just for our own benefit, but that when it comes conscious becomes beneficial to others as well. And that's the way that the world changes, at least according to old stories, and I'm sticking so far with old stories. So in order to follow the soul, the idea is that the soul is here to transform. So we're not supposed to be the same person at the end that we were at the beginning. And when we give up other people's expectations and some of our own, let's say, ego-based expectations, we become more capable of transforming our lives. And the transformation, a word that means to move from one form to another, is not random or aimless. It's actually moving with the aim of the soul that is aware somehow of our direction, of our destiny in life. So that process involves healing, but it also involves taking the risks to try and be creative in the world. And I say risk because since most people do not know really who they are, and most people are not living the calling of their own life, when they see someone doing it, they can become not just jealous, but also envious and resentful. And people that know you can say, that's not you. Who do you think you are? When I say, who do you think you are, that's really a phrase from my childhood. My father, who had to leave school in the third grade and really didn't have much education, and didn't live the dream of his life. He revealed to me that he actually longed to be a writer, but he didn't have any education. He had beautiful penmanship, but not his education had been interrupted by poverty. He didn't live that dream. And so when I come along as a kid and I have more opportunity than he did, he's working hard so I can go to school and learn, and I'm coming home with high grades and stuff like that. And he would look at the report card and whatever, and something would cause him to say to me, who do you think you are? And it's a really odd thing. It's like a curse. As a kid, it was like, whoa, I thought I was your son. I thought you would know who I was. It was really puzzling to me. But when I say it now, who do you think you are? That's the question that I'm talking about here. What I eventually figured out, I am that thing I am trying to awaken to. I am not simply my father's child. I am not simply the result of early life omissions and early life woundings and early life traumas. I am actually a person trying to figure out who I already am in order that I can live that out. I hope that makes sense, because the interesting thing about curses, and most people have a curse, the interesting thing about it is it's a blessing inverted. When we can actually pay attention to something that feels like a curse, we can then find the blessing within it, which is similar to finding the divine word on the underside of the lot in life, which is experienced mostly as limiting and damaging. When we are willing to embrace the genuine themes of our lives, I'll stick with this curse from my father. Part of the theme of my life has always had to do with knowledge. I've always wanted to know more, and it turned out not to be simple knowledge, not an accumulation of data or whatever they call that, facts. It became an accumulation and an engagement with transcended ideas, with stories full of images and symbols, and with aspects of wisdom that are connected to the origins of life, in a sense, and what I call primordial thinking. That has always been there. And yet, I have often turned away from it, sometimes for common and decent reasons, like becoming a parent, raising a family, or first adventure things like learning how to make a way in the world. But every time I've been able to engage that theme, then, as they say, the plot thickens and things begin to be more meaningful, sometimes more painful, but also more meaningful. And then what people used to call revelation, not in a religious term, but in a more psychological, immediate term, revelation becomes more possible. Our soul is trying to reveal to us who we already are at our core. And every time we engage the core themes of our lives, then that awakening and that revelation becomes more possible. And then we are living the path of the soul. We are living the calling that was part of our life from the very beginning. So what matters most to us has the power to transform us from within. And each crisis in life, each crossroads that we come into is secretly, which will involved by the way the tension of opposites. Should I do it? Should I didn't? Should I not? Should I stay in the marriage? Should I get a divorce? Should I go for this thing that I love, or should I just play it safe? We're always going to, in the crossroads, we get into those tensions. And each time we do that, then if we can connect to what matters most to us, what matters to our soul, then what happens, it becomes the opportunity to not just change, but to transform. And according to all the old stories, that's what our soul wants us to do. At those crossroads, at those places of tension that inevitably happen to everyone, there are creative energies waiting to enter the world through us. And in this idea of the two adventures, it often comes down to fear of trying, or complacency and fear of discomfort, or taking the adventure. And when for at least myself, when I can recognize it's the adventure of the soul, I'm more willing to risk the discomfort, the uneasiness, the uncertainty, with the understanding that the soul knows what we're aimed at and how we're supposed to awaken and expand and grow. So I'm calling that the second adventure of life. And I'm saying that when the world is caught in its intensity of polarized things, when the world seems to be falling apart, that the soul is imagining it's time to go on the second adventure. And the second adventure of each person's life, by definition, by the goddess Fortuna, by the lot in life, each person's second adventure is not just meaningful to them, it's beneficial to others and to the world. So there's more questions. Would you say more about tremendous tension and unity being present in times of great creation and destruction? The old political parties are dying, and something new seems to be emerging, which could be said for many things. It feels like everything is happening now in a way different than I can remember in my lifetime. I'm with you. I've been around for a while, and I lived through the 60s, which was a time of great transformation, a total radical change in culture that gave us the civil rights movement, the feminine movement, all kinds of things came out of it that were amazing. And they didn't all stick, and they're all under threat now again, but that's how it goes. This is more so. We are living in a really unusual, extreme time when nature is rattling at the same time as culture is in upheaval. It is a wild, radical time to be alive. But I think the way to imagine it is that it is recreation time. Yes, many things are dying and disappearing. Literally, there are species dying as I'm talking, as we're here with each other. There are species dying. There are languages dying. All kinds of things like that are happening. But at the same time, the world is renewing itself in ways that can be subtle and not yet clear to everyone. And I'm trusting in the old idea that we are here to transform. We're here to be part of a recreation as a better way to approach it than to think that we're helpless and we can't do anything, and to wind up being a victim of our own inability to imagine that our souls have meaning, purpose, and value. Just to pick up on the political parties, all of the institutions are now predictably unable to keep up with the rapidity of changes and the radical nature of the transformations happening in both nature and culture. One reason that many governments and political parties will not respond to the obvious elements of climate crisis is because they can't. As institutions, they cannot respond with the depth of feeling that's required, for the depth of imagination that's needed, and for the capacity to transform that is necessary. And so political parties are amongst those institutions that used to seem like they could protect us, that now cannot protect us because they cannot transform quickly enough, and they can understand that those things that used to be solid are now fluid, and that we have to change with them. And it's very disorienting, and that's why I keep saying, if we don't have the sense that there's something meaningful that's already inscribed on our souls, that there isn't a purpose that we can find within ourselves, and that we can't trust that there's some sense of inner guidance that is connected not to foolishness or not to abstract ideas, but is connected to some essence of life that's trying to flow through us. If we can't do that, then we can easily get lost in either the tension of the opposites and be overwhelmed by that, or we can be pulled to one side or the other and miss the opportunity that our souls came here in order to find and live out. What can I do to help other people through this time? That's the natural instinct of altruism and of care for others. And it's a meaningful thing, because if I can help someone else, that alleviates some of my own inabilities. And so I want to say two things. If nothing is clear, find some place where you can offer help, because in that offering of help, we often begin to realize what help we need. I would say don't do it to save other people, because that is a disaster that history has seen already many times. Those trying to simply save other people actually wind up distorting the relationship. That's how that works. We're here to save ourselves. But helping someone else can be a way of finding a way of becoming more attuned to helping one's own self. Because if I really want to help someone else, I have to be in pretty good shape to be helpful. And so that's a thing to start. But I would say more important than that in a certain way is, and I've said it several ways tonight, when we become a version of our genuine self, when we respond to the calling of our soul, when we begin to unfold the story inside us that's trying to live into the world, we automatically help other people. So then we don't have to wear it on our sleeve. We just do. I mean, young people, even though they won't admit it, watch older people all the time. It is natural in all mammals, and it's really natural in the human species as well. And when young people see older people doing meaningful things, doing courageous things, doing things that have beauty in it, doing honest things, speaking for truth when most people are passing falsities around and so on and so forth, that inspires them to try to aspire to that kind of self. And so, but it's also true that when a person becomes a better version of themselves, a certain kind of generosity, a certain kind of presence of spirit is noticeable by other people. I'll just repeat the mantra. When we become a more genuine version of our own selves, we automatically help other people. This is the person coming back with separation consciousness. I'm sorry, I didn't understand it. For me, separation consciousness refers to the belief that humans are separate from the natural world and each other. The dominant narrative of individualism versus interdependence. Where does this narrative originate? Okay, now I get what you mean. So the entire Western world is formulated upon the idea that we are separate from nature. And of course, it's a false idea. Human nature is secretly connected to great nature. And you really can't separate the two. You can, to the degree that you can cause damage to both sides of it, but ultimately you cannot separate the two. And so then you get, as is said right here, you get individualism, meaning that I get what I want, and that automatically means other people don't get what they want. It's the narrative of winners and losers. It's a false narrative. But here's the way I see it. I've been saying all along throughout this session that the idea of the individual soul being unique and its value being connected to the uniqueness is of utmost importance. But here's the way it works. So I think of it as the individual and the community. Community is a Latin word that comes from communitas. Communitas does not mean that people are living near each other simply. And it does not simply mean that people are dependent on each other. Communitas means that something so deep and meaningful happens that people come together whether they agree with each other or not. It's more connected to empathy. It's more connected to the sense that the values of deep humanity are trying to be expressed not just individually but collectively as communitas or community. And so the way I imagine it is that the individual soul is unique. It is automatically born with gifts and a calling and a purpose, and it has meaning that affects other people. But its gifts are intended to be given to the community. And its individuality, if you want to call it that, or its genius, needs the support of the community. At the same time, the community needs the awakening of the individual souls and the genius of those souls in order to have direction, in order to have meaning, in order to have beauty, and in order to have purpose. And so the genius inspires the community and gives the sense of wisdom, knowledge, beauty, grace, and other things. And then the community blesses those genius qualities and supports the individual in further development of the unique sense of self. So that's what I call interdependence. And so I hope that applies. But now I understand what separation consciousness, what you meant. Yeah, we're suffering from that. It's just it's a curse. It's a collective curse on humanity in the Western world. The idea that human culture and nature are opposites. It's a misunderstanding of tension. Ultimately, human nature is connected to great nature, and part of the change that's trying to happen to the world is an awakening to the fact of those supposed opposites being secretly unified. And when that happens, then we go from the tension of exclusion and opposites into the dynamics of a creation. And that's what I was saying that the myths are trying to tell us. If we have managed to drive our inner guide away through our own lies and dishonesty, is there a way to recover the connection to this great inner person? There is a feeling of unworthiness that gets embedded and saps the spontaneity and joy and even the creative genius. Thank you. We're all in that condition. We're all that way. We could not have the amount of dishonesty in the world that is present now if we weren't dishonest inside ourselves. And the fact that it's out there, it's not there as an end game or an end thing. It's there as a remedy. It's there as a symptom looking for a remedy. But I guess I want to say this. There's a lot of things you could say. And I was raised Catholic, so naturally I have all kinds of, ready awareness to guilt. But also an easy opening to shame. And so we all carry guilt for having done the wrong things or made mistakes that harmed other people. And then we all carry shame, and most people carry not just their own shame, but their parents' excess shame. And then some groups are expected to carry the shame of other groups who claim they don't have it, and so on. That's part of the dynamic and the mess of life. But if the question is there a way to recover the connection to this great person, or this inner person, the mistapeo, the atman, the daimon of one's soul, there always has to be a way to recover the connection. And so let me say this. Near as I can understand it, not only are we all deserving of forgiveness, but we all need to learn practices of forgiveness. And let me put it this way. All parents wound their children. That's just the setup of life. The parents can never fully give the children what they want. Because what the children, besides love and protection, what they want is something they have to find and develop in themselves. And so, for various reasons, parents make mistakes with their children. and also wound their children. But eventually what happens is the child grows up and leaves, but it's carrying the wounds that it got when it couldn't be independent and was also defenseless. That's the setup. And so we're each carrying those early life wounds. And there may be a part of it or a phase in it which we have to realize, oh, wait a minute, this was done to me. I didn't necessarily deserve that. And some of those things were quite inappropriate and really damaging. But then the next phase is to realize, oh, it's not the parents or the omission of the parents that's wounding me now. It's the introjected parents inside myself that continued to do it to me. I hope I'm making sense. My father would say, who do you think you are? Well, naturally, I have an inner critic who every time I think I do something pretty good, the inner critic goes, who do you think you are? And so then the issue is not what they did back then, although that's important to recognize. The issue becomes, what am I doing right now that continues to wound me? And that awareness of how I wound myself resides right next to a capacity to forgive myself that needs to be switched on. So I'm trying to say that if there is this great person inside, this deep self, this deep soul, one aspect of it is a quality to forgive that we can tap into and that we need to tap into, because we started this session with the story of Zervan and a mistake at the beginning of creation, and it's no accident to start that way. Mistakes began at the beginning. They're part of the world. The worst thing to imagine is that we should be a perfect person. First of all, there aren't any. And second of all, you don't want to be one. We all make mistakes. But when we tune in to this essence I'm calling the great person within, or the deep soul, or the deep self, when we tune into that, then even our mistakes have value. It's a hard thing to get. But eventually we can make mistakes in the right direction. In the meantime, if we want to grow psychologically, if we want to expand our soul and grow spiritually, we have to learn how to forgive ourselves. And once we start forgiving ourselves, we'll find it easier to forgive other people. And all of a sudden, that's starting to shift the dynamics between us and others and the dynamics in the world. What key message would you have for youth and their relationship to depression and suicide? Thank you. I think about youth all the time. I thought I grew up when it was rough. This is rougher. Young people are growing into a world that's falling apart in front of everybody, and they're growing into a world that offers endless distractions and substitutes like AI and all kinds of other things that are substitutes for the authentic. And so naturally, they can fall into depression more readily. And I imagine all young people imagine suicide. Why? Because when we're young, we're looking to be born again. In order to be born again, something must die. And part of what happens in youth suicide is the young person confuses the idea that something must die with the notion that they must die. Suicide, it's not explaining everything, but suicide can be a mistaken understanding because we don't have cultural ways, used to be called rites of passage. In a rites of passage, the young girl or young boy dies in a symbolic death, the death of childhood, in order to be reborn as their own unique person. And since that doesn't actually happen in a way that is psychologically convincing and spiritually enhancing, what happens is young people are more prone to depression and suicide. And when they hear that the world is about to end and nothing matters and you shouldn't even have children and all this stuff that comes as part of the uncertainty and doubt in the world, then it becomes, why should I even try? Why should I even live? And I'm going to go back to something I said. Young people often watch older people. They think older people are weird, but interesting. And when young people see older people doing things that have the aroma of wholeness or the aroma of meaning and beauty, that can be inspiring to them because it's a natural thing that used to happen. But my key message to young people and the idea of depression and suicide is depression can be a way of descending to finding a deeper spirit that's trying to awaken. And suicide is a confusion between the idea that something must die so that I can be reborn, and the idea that I must die because I'm not worthy. Someone says this: you have written, when we face our fate, we find our destiny, which is our soul's destination in life. What is the most practical way to face this fate? Is it simple introspection? Going backwards? No, it is not simple introspection. Facing our fate is like accepting the hand we were dealt. These ideas come from this book I wrote called Fate and Destiny, the Two Agreements in Life. And what I wanted to do, and I'm still working on it, is say fate is everything that limits us, and destination is what calls us to a meaningful life of an expanded and awakened soul. And we have both those things, just as I was saying from the story of Fortuna and the lot in life. So facing our fate means accepting the hand we were dealt. And for some people, that means a life born into poverty. For other people, it means born into wealth with a deadening sense of emptiness. For other people, it means born with a physical ailment. And for other people, it means born with a nervous system that is always on edge. You know, everyone knows what it is. We complain to our friends about it. And it becomes manifest pretty early in life and becomes intensified during youth. And in a world like this, it becomes intensified all the time. And so one of the tricks is facing it. One of the old ideas I love is we can't help but be who we are and where. That's the beginning. Accepting I am this person. I have these limitations. I've made these mistakes. I came from this kind of fate inside a family that had its own problems that were already there when I was born into it. And whatever the story is, we have to accept it. And once we accept that, then we become like that Naskapi native person that is alone and facing the whole forest and the whole world and realizing I'm not completely equal to this, except I have this connection to this sense of a deeper self that knows why I'm here, that knows what my style should be, and that knows that I came here to live a life of meaning that is aimed at a destination that I am qualified to seek. Something like that. But we have to first face our fate. And that's true on a collective level. Each culture has its own fate based on things that happened early on and that are continuing to occur as kind of disturbing patterns in the culture. We're here in the United States. We're speaking from here. And one of the aspects of fate in the United States is racism. It's part of the origin of the so-called America. And it has to be faced every generation. And that's a struggle with fate. Every time it gets faced, people become more free. Not just the people that were enslaved, but everybody becomes more free. The enslaver is entrapped more comfortably, but entrapped in the same dynamic as the enslaved. And inside ourselves, it's the same way. Whatever our fateful issues are, whatever our abandonment issues are, whatever our fears of overwhelm are, they are part of our fate. We have to face them. And all of a sudden, like a curse that's broken open, like a spell that's dispersed, inside that fate, it used to be called the twist of fate. And what happens is the limitations of fate, when we face them, we find this twist that's in them, and it turns from something that entraps us inside, that something opens to a destination that connects us, what is deep inside us, with a meaningful destiny in the world. So it's not simple introspection. It's a dynamic self-review that is connected to something trying to awaken. And I'll end by saying something I've said several times already. At some point, we have to trust that there's something in us that knows us better than we do, and that knows specifically why we are here, what our souls came to do, and how we can set about living a life of meaning that leads to a destiny. So I'll stop there. And I guess I'll go to a poem. I didn't begin with a poem, so I want to end with a poem. This is Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, so-called romantic poet, which you could also call mythological poet. And this is called Just as the Winged Energy of Delight. And it's really great to be able to say the word delight, because we've been dealing with the tension in the world. And one of the things that gets lost is delight and joy, which are actually part of our inheritance. But the poem goes like this. Just as the winged energy of delight carried you over many chasms early on, now raise the daringly imagined arch, holding up the astounding bridges of life. Miracle doesn't only lie in the amazing living through and defeat of danger. Miracles become miracles in the effort and achievement that is simply earned. And to work with the things of the world is not hubris. When building the association beyond words, then denser and denser the pattern becomes, and being carried along by life is not enough. So, take your well-disciplined strengths and stretch them between two opposing poles, because inside human beings is where God learns. I'll just do that last two lines again. I mean, they're two of the best lines in the history of poetry, but also it sounds like the myth from ancient Persia, the idea of stretching between the poles, and then the gods learn. So take your well-disciplined strengths and stretch them between two opposing poles, because inside human beings is where God learns. Inside human beings, we could say also, is a divine word that's trying to awaken, and that can teach us, but also can teach the world. Thank you for being interested in the vision and unity and being willing to listen to all of this kind of mythology and psychology. I appreciate you coming to these things, and I mean it when I'm saying that each one of us is gifted from the beginning, is born with a purpose and an aim, and when we awaken to that and struggle to live in that tension, then we are not just healing ourselves, but we are benefiting the world. And right now, changing the soul is probably the only meaningful way that we can change the world. Thank you.